The wedding invitation fell from my trembling hands like a death sentence written in gold lettering. 2 days. In 2 days, the man I'd been living with for 4 years was marrying someone else. My name is Victoria Reed, I'm 28 years old, and what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about love, betrayal, and justice. For years of my life spent living with Marcus Vale, believing every lie that fell from his perfect lips. For years of waking up in his penthouse apartment, making his coffee exactly how he liked it, ironing his designer shirts and waiting, always waiting for him to set a wedding date, waiting for him to introduce me to his family, waiting for him to choose me. I should have seen the signs. The mysterious weekend trips for work conferences, the hushed phone calls he'd take in his study with the door locked, the way he'd change the subject every time I mentioned our future. But when you're in love with someone, you explain away the red flags. You fill in the gaps with hope instead of logic. Marcus worked in corporate finance, all expensive suits and confident handshakes. He drove a silver Porsche and lived in the kind of apartment you see in magazines. I was a graphic designer working freelance gigs, barely scraping by in my tiny studio across town. When he told me he loved me, when he slipped that simple silver ring onto my finger and promised we'd get married, when the time was right, I thought I'd won the lottery. I thought wrong. That Saturday morning started like any other. Marcus had left early for the gym, and I was tidying up his bedroom when I spotted something white peeking out from under the mattress. At first, I thought it was just a receipt or business document. Marcus was always bringing work home, leaving papers scattered around before filing them away in his immaculate home office. But this wasn't a work document. This was heavy cardstock with elegant script that made my blood turn to ice water. Marcus Vale and Isabella Rose Montgomery request the honor of your presence at their wedding ceremony. Sunday, September 15th, 2024. Sacred Heart Chapel. 2 days away. My legs gave out. I sank to the floor, clutching the invitation like it might somehow transform into something that made sense. Isabella Rose Montgomery. Who the hell was Isabella Rose Montgomery? And why was she marrying M.Y. Marcus in 2 days? The sound of the front door opening sent panic shooting through my veins. Marcus was back from his workout, whistling that tuneless melody he always hummed when he was in a good mood. In a few seconds, he'd walk into this bedroom and find me holding the evidence of his betrayal. Part of me wanted to hide the invitation, to pretend I'd never seen it, to go on living in the comfortable lie I'd been inhabiting for 4 years. But I couldn't. The truth was out, and there was no putting it back. "Vic, you up, babe?" His voice drifted down the hallway, casual and affectionate. The same voice that had whispered promises in my ear for 4 years. The same voice that had told me I was his forever. I couldn't answer. My throat had closed completely, like my body was protecting me from saying something I couldn't take back. His footsteps grew closer, and then he appeared in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee from my favorite cafe. He was still in his gym clothes, his dark hair damp with sweat, looking so devastatingly handsome that for a split second I almost forgot why I was sitting on his bedroom floor. Then his eyes found the invitation in my hands, and his face changed. The warm, loving expression I knew so well disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating that made him look like a complete stranger. "What's that?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. I held up the invitation with shaking hands. "You tell me, Marcus. What is this?" He set the coffee cups down with deliberate precision, buying himself time to think. When he looked at me again, the mask had slipped completely. The man I thought I knew was gone. "Where did you find that?" His voice was flat, emotionless. "Under your bed. While I was cleaning." Like I always do. Like the perfect little girlfriend I've been for 4 years. For a moment, I thought he might try to explain. Maybe offer some excuse that could somehow make this nightmare make sense. Instead, he laughed. A short, bitter sound that cut through me like glass. Did you honestly think I'd marry someone like you? The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually flinched backward as if he'd slapped me. What? Come on, Vic. Be realistic. He gestured around his expensive apartment, then at me in my worn pajamas. Look at this place. Look at my life. Did you really believe I'd tie myself down to some freelance artist who can barely pay rent? Each word was a knife twisting in my chest. But you said you loved me. I said what you needed to hear. His voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing stock prices. You were convenient, Victoria. You cooked, you cleaned. You were available whenever I needed company. But marriage? A real future? That was never going to happen. I stared at this man I'd shared a bed with for 4 years. This man I'd rearranged my entire life around, and realized I'd never known him at all. Who is she? I whispered. Isabella? Someone appropriate. He straightened his shoulders, slipping into the confident businessman persona he wore like armor. Someone from my world. Her family owns half the real estate downtown, and she has an MBA from Harvard. She's the kind of woman a man like me marries. And what am I? The smile that crossed his face was cruel and cold. You're the kind of woman a man like me keeps around until he finds someone better. For years of believing I was building something real, something lasting. For years of being nothing more than a placeholder. Get out, he said, already turning toward his closet. I have a bachelor party tonight, and I need to get ready. A bachelor party. While I'd been planning our imaginary future, he'd been celebrating his real one with his real friends, preparing to marry his real fiancé. I stumbled toward the door, my vision blurred with tears. At the threshold, I turned back one last time, hoping to see some flicker of remorse, some sign that for years had meant something to him. Instead, I found him checking his phone, already moving on to whatever came next in his carefully orchestrated life. Victoria, he called out just as I reached the hallway. I turned, hope fluttering pathetically in my chest despite everything. Leave your key on the kitchen counter. I don't remember driving home or climbing the stairs to my apartment. The next thing I knew, I was sitting on my bathroom floor, sobbing so hard I thought my ribs might crack. The wedding invitation lay beside me like evidence of a crime, its elegant script blurred by my tears. My phone buzzed. A text from my best friend Natalie asking if I wanted to grab brunch. I stared at the message for a long time before calling her instead. Vic, what's wrong? You sound terrible. And then it all came pouring out. The wedding invitation. Marcus's cruel words. For years of lies. For years of being a convenient arrangement while he built a real life with someone else. Natalie listened without interrupting, and when I finally finished, the silence stretched between us. That piece of SHD, she said finally, her voice tight with fury. That absolute waste of oxygen. Nat, I'm so stupid. You warned me about him and I didn't listen. Stop. Her voice was firm. You're not stupid. You loved someone, and he took advantage of that love. That makes him a monster, not you a fool. What am I supposed to do now? He's getting married tomorrow, and I'm sitting here crying over a man who never loved me. First, Natalie said, you're going to stop crying. Then you're going to get angry. And then we're going to make sure Marcus Vale learns that actions have consequences. Something in her tone sparked a flame in my chest. Small, but growing stronger. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that his perfect wedding day might not go exactly as planned. Victoria, this man destroyed you. He threw away 4 years of your life like they meant nothing. Don't you think his precious bride deserves to know what kind of man she's marrying?" The flame grew brighter. Natalie was right. I had been destroyed, but I didn't have to stay that way. "Besides," she continued, "don't you think the bride Isabella has a right to know that her fiancé has been living with another woman for 4 years? By the time we hung up, I had a plan. Not just to crash the wedding, but to make sure the truth came out. Marcus thought he could discard me like yesterday's newspaper and ride off into the sunset with his perfect bride. He was about to learn that some women fight back. I spent the next 24 hours preparing. I called my brother Jake, my cousin Amy, and my friend Devin from art school. One by one, I assembled a small army of people who loved me, people who were outraged on my behalf, people who were ready to stand with me when I faced Marcus again. Sacred Heart Chapel stood like a fortress of white stone against the September sky. Cars lined the street, expensive cars that spoke of old money and established families. Mercedes, Bentleys, even a few Maseratis parked near the front steps. I sat in Natalie's Honda Accord across the street, watching the guests arrive in their designer dresses and tailored suits. These were Marcus's people, his real people. The ones he'd never introduced me to in 4 years because I didn't belong in their world. "You ready for this?" Natalie asked from the driver's seat. She was dressed in a simple black dress that could pass for wedding appropriate, her red hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. "I'm ready," I said, though my hands were shaking as I checked my reflection one last time. I'd spent my last few $100s on an expensive dress that would help me blend in among Marcus's crowd, elegant enough to pass, but not so flashy that I'd stand out before I was ready to make my move. At 1:45, 15 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, I saw her. Isabella Rose Montgomery stepped out of a white Rolls-Royce, and even from across the street, she was breathtaking. Her wedding dress looked like it cost more than I made in a year, all silk and pearls and intricate beadwork that probably took months to complete. Her veil flowed behind her like a cloud, and her smile was radiant as photographers captured her perfect moment. She looked happy. Genuinely, completely happy. And for just a moment, I almost lost my nerve. But then I remembered Marcus's words. "You're the kind of woman a man like me keeps around until he finds someone better." Isabella deserved to know what kind of man she was marrying. And Marcus deserved to face the consequences of his lies. "It's time," I said. We crossed the street together, my small crew flanking me as we approached the chapel steps. The massive oak doors stood open, and I could hear the soft murmur of conversation from inside, punctuated by the gentle notes of a string quartet. The sanctuary was even more impressive than I'd expected. Soaring ceilings, stained glass windows casting rainbow patterns across marble floors, and enough white roses to stock a flower shop. Every surface was adorned with elegant arrangements, their sweet fragrance filling the air with the scent of money and privilege. The guests were seated in perfect rows, their attention focused on the altar where Marcus stood waiting. He looked devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled, his posture confident and relaxed. This was his moment, his perfect day, his carefully orchestrated transition from one life to the next. I slipped into a pew near the back, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. Natalie sat beside me, her hand finding mine and squeezing tight. The music changed, signaling the start of the processional. Bridesmaids in dusty rose dresses began their slow walk down the aisle, followed by flower girls scattering white rose petals. The guests rose to their feet as the wedding march began, and all eyes turned toward the back of the chapel. Isabella appeared in the doorway, her arm linked with her father's. She was even more beautiful up close, her face glowing with joy and anticipation. She had no idea that her perfect day was about to become a nightmare. As she began her walk down the aisle, I stood up. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the chapel. The music stopped abruptly. Heads turned in my direction, confusion rippling through the crowd like a wave. Isabella paused halfway down the aisle, her brow furrowed as she tried to understand what was happening. Marcus's face went white as he spotted me. For a moment, our eyes met across the crowded sanctuary, and I saw fear flicker in his gaze. "Good. He should be afraid. I'm sorry to interrupt," I continued, stepping into the aisle. "But there's something everyone needs to know before this ceremony continues. Security." Marcus's voice cracked as he called out, but the chapel's security was minimal. Just an elderly usher who looked more confused than threatening. "My name is Victoria Reed," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "And for the past 4 years, I've been living with the groom." Gasps echoed through the sanctuary. Isabella's bouquet slipped from her hands, white roses scattering across the marble floor. Her father's face turned purple with rage. "That's a lie," Marcus shouted from the altar, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, scrolling to the photos I'd prepared. These are pictures of us together at his apartment. The apartment where I've been living, cooking his meals, doing his laundry, and planning our wedding for the past 4 years. I held up the phone, showing a recent selfie of Marcus and me in his kitchen. We were laughing at something he'd said, his arms wrapped around me from behind, both of us looking completely, blissfully happy. It was one of dozens I had documenting a relationship Marcus was now trying to pretend had never existed. He told me we were going to get married. I continued, my voice carrying to every corner of the chapel. He gave me a ring. He made promises. And yesterday, I found your wedding invitation hidden under his bed while I was cleaning his apartment. Isabella's face crumpled, and she sank onto a nearby pew as the full weight of what I was saying hit her. Her bridesmaids rushed to her side, their rose-colored dresses a stark contrast to the white flowers scattered around their feet. "You want to know what he said when I confronted him?" I asked, turning to address the crowd directly. "He said I was just some freelance artist who wasn't good enough for him. He said I was convenient. He said I was the kind of woman a man like him keeps around until he finds someone better." The sanctuary erupted in whispers and shocked exclamations. Some guests were already reaching for their phones, no doubt preparing to share this drama with the world. Others were standing up, preparing to flee this disaster of a wedding. "Isabella," I called out, my voice gentler now. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because you deserve to know the truth about the man you're about to marry. You deserve to know that he's been lying to both of us." Isabella looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, her perfect makeup ruined. "Is it true?" she whispered, but her question wasn't directed at me. All eyes turned to Marcus, who stood frozen at the altar like a deer caught in headlights. The confident, successful man I'd fallen in love with was gone, replaced by someone who looked small and desperate and caught. "Marcus." Isabella's voice was stronger now, carrying clearly through the silent chapel. "Is it true?" For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. He stood there in his perfect tuxedo, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, he found his voice. "Isabella, I can explain." "Explain what?" Her father's voice boomed through the chapel as he strode down the aisle, his face red with fury. "Explain how you've been living with another woman while engaged to my daughter? Explain how you've made a mockery of our family." But before Marcus could answer, before security could intervene, Before anyone could make sense of what was happening, the chapel doors burst open. "Stop this wedding immediately." Every head turned toward the voice. A woman in her 50s stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the obvious urgency of her arrival. She carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, and when she spoke, her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Mother?" Marcus's voice cracked like a teenager's. Mrs. Rebecca Vale, Marcus's mother, whom I'd never met in 4 years of dating her son, walked slowly down the aisle, her heels clicking against the marble floor with military precision. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks, Marcus," she said, her voice echoing in the stunned silence. "Ever since I found out about this wedding from the society pages." She stopped in front of Isabella, her expression softening slightly. "My dear, I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. But yes, everything this young woman has said is true. My son has been living with her for years." Marcus's face went from white to green. "Mother, you don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly." Mrs. Vale's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "I understand that you've been lying to everyone, including me. I understand that you've been stringing along 2 women, making promises you never intended to keep." She turned to address the stunned congregation, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades navigating society scandals. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption, but I cannot in good conscience allow this ceremony to proceed. My son has committed fraud, emotional fraud against both of these women." She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "Marcus, you might be interested to know that I've had you investigated. Professional curiosity, you might say, after I started noticing discrepancies." Marcus's face went ashen. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that you've been embezzling money from our company Montgomery and Associates to fund this elaborate lifestyle." Mrs. Vale's voice was steady, but I could see the pain in her eyes. "I'm talking about the forged documents, the money you've been skimming from client accounts, the falsified expense reports. I did everything to raise you right, but you choose to steal and destroy my company like your father." The chapel erupted in shocked whispers. Isabella's father stepped forward, his face thunderous. "What is she saying, Marcus?" But Mrs. Vale wasn't finished. "I'm saying that my son is not only a liar and a cheat, but also a thief. And I'm saying that I've already turned all the evidence over to the authorities." As if summoned by her words, the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing closer by the second. Marcus's head whipped toward the chapel doors, his eyes wide with panic. "You called the police on your own son?" "I called them on a criminal," Mrs. Vale replied coldly. "The fact that he happens to be my son is irrelevant." The sirens were louder now, and through the open doors, I could see the flash of red and blue lights. Marcus looked around wildly, like a trapped animal searching for an escape route. "This is insane," he shouted. "You're all insane. Isabella, tell them. Tell them this is our wedding day." But Isabella was already standing, her wedding dress rustling around her like armor. She walked toward him with measured steps, and when she reached the altar, she looked up at him with eyes that held no trace of the love that had been there just minutes before. "Tell me something, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent chapel. "Did you ever love me, or was I just another convenient arrangement?" Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. The answer was written all over his face. Isabella nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd already suspected. Then, without warning, her hand flew through the air and gave him a dirty slap that echoed off the stone walls like a gunshot. "That's for Victoria," she said. Then she slapped him again, even harder. "And that's for me." The police officers appeared in the doorway, just as Marcus stumbled backward from the force of Isabella's second slap. They moved down the aisle with professional efficiency, their presence transforming the sacred space into a crime scene. "Marcus Vale." "Yes," Marcus whispered, all the fight gone out of him. "You're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and theft. You have the right to remain silent." As the officer read Marcus his rights, the chapel began to empty. Guests fled toward the exits, some stopping to offer awkward condolences to Isabella and her family, others simply eager to escape the scandal that would undoubtedly be front-page news. I stood frozen in my pew, watching as the man I'd loved for 4 years was handcuffed and led away. This wasn't how I'd imagined this moment would go. I'd wanted justice, yes, but I'd never expected it to be this swift, this complete, this devastating. "Victoria?" I turned to find Isabella standing beside my pew. Up close, I could see that she was younger than I'd thought, probably around 24. Her wedding dress was wrinkled now, her veil askew, her makeup streaked with tears. "I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling inadequate. "I'm sorry your wedding day was ruined. I'm sorry you had to find out this way." She shook her head. "Don't apologize. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life." She paused, studying my face. "For years." I nodded. "For years of my life wasted on him." "I'm sorry," she said. "For both of us." We stood there for a moment, two women who'd been betrayed by the same man, united in our shared pain and our mutual escape from a future that would have destroyed us both. "What will you do now?" Isabella asked. I looked around the chapel at the scattered rose petals and abandoned programs, at the altar where Marcus had stood just minutes before, confident in his deception. "I don't know," I admitted. "Start over, I guess. Figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be what someone else wants me to be." Isabella nodded. "Me too." 8 months later, I stood in my new art studio, natural light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows as I put the finishing touches on a painting that would be featured in my first solo exhibition. The space was everything I'd dreamed of, but never dared pursue while I was waiting for Marcus to decide my future for me. The door chimed and Isabella walked in. She'd cut her hair short and dyed it a rich auburn that brought out the gold flecks in her eyes. She looked younger, freer, and more beautiful. "The usual?" I asked, gesturing toward the coffee station I'd set up in one corner of the studio. "Actually, make it 2, she said, smiling. "I have news." We'd become unlikely friends after that day at the chapel. What had started as shared trauma had gradually evolved into genuine affection and mutual respect. Isabella had used her family's connections to help me get my first gallery showing, while I'd helped her navigate her newfound independence from her controlling father. "I got the job," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "The foundation in Seattle. I start next month." "Isabella, that's amazing." I reached across to squeeze her hand. After the wedding disaster, Isabella had discovered a passion for environmental advocacy and had been applying to nonprofits across the country. "What about you?" she asked. "Any word on the gallery response?" I grinned. "They want to extend the showing for another month. Apparently, people are really connecting with the Phoenix Rising series." It was true. The paintings I'd created in the months following the wedding, raw, emotional pieces about betrayal, rebirth, and reclaiming your power, had struck a chord with viewers. Art critics were calling them brutally honest and triumphantly defiant. "I'm so proud of you," Isabella said, and I could tell she meant it. "You've built something incredible here." "We both have," I said. "We've both built ourselves back up." It had taken months of therapy, sleepless nights, and moments of doubt, but we'd both emerged stronger than we'd ever imagined possible. Marcus, meanwhile, had been sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. His mother had testified against him at trial, her testimony delivered with the same cold precision she'd shown at the chapel. The financial crimes had been more extensive than anyone realized. He'd stolen over $2 million from various accounts to fund his double life. "Have you heard from him?" Isabella asked, as if reading my thoughts. I shook my head. "No, and I don't want to. That chapter of my life is closed." It was true. In the beginning, I'd been consumed with anger. Furious at Marcus for the lies, at myself for believing them, at the 4 years I'd lost. But anger was exhausting, and eventually I'd chosen to channel that energy into building something better. And I had built something better. The studio was thriving, my art was gaining recognition, and I'd started dating again. Nothing serious yet, but I was learning to trust my instincts and to value myself enough to walk away from anyone who didn't treat me with respect. As Isabella prepared to leave for her new life in Seattle, I realized something that would have shocked the woman I'd been 8 months ago. I was grateful. Not grateful for the betrayal itself, but grateful for what it had taught me about my own strength, my own worth, my own capacity to rebuild. Marcus had thought he was discarding his inconvenient placeholder while upgrading to his perfect life partner. Instead, he'd freed 2 women who were far better than he deserved. Women who would go on to build lives he could never have imagined. He thought his wedding day would be the beginning of his perfect life. Instead, it had been the beginning of his downfall. As for me, I'd thought his betrayal would destroy me. Instead, it had set me free to become the woman I was always meant to be. Not someone's convenient arrangement, not a placeholder waiting for permission to live, but the protagonist of my own story. And that, I realized as I watched the sunset paint my studio walls gold, was the sweetest revenge of all. Marcus had tried to make me small, tried to convince me I wasn't worthy of real love or real success. But he'd been wrong about that, just as he'd been wrong about so many things. I wasn't the kind of woman a man like him married. I was better than that. I was the kind of woman who married herself first, who built her own dreams, who created her own happily ever after. The best revenge wasn't destroying Marcus's life. He'd done that himself. The best revenge was proving that his cruelest words were lies. I wasn't just some freelance artist who couldn't pay rent. I was an artist whose work moved people, whose story inspired others to find their own strength. Marcus thought he'd thrown me away like garbage. Instead, he'd given me the greatest gift of all, the chance to discover that I was worth so much more than his scraps of affection. His perfect wedding had lasted exactly 37 minutes before it imploded in spectacular fashion. But my perfect life? That was just getting started.